Welcome to the OTA podcast where we discuss everything performance training. I'm Coach Chris Barnard. Let's get into it. Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the OTA podcast. I'm Coach Chris Barnard. And for today, what I wanted to be able to discuss was simple programming to be able to maximize linear speed. So this is one of those topics where I feel like there's many ways to skin a cat, but there's a couple standard principles that you need to understand. And from a programming as a coach's perspective, like what's the easiest way that we know we have to check those boxes so that we're making those adaptations? Now I could sit here and just say, hey, make sure your athlete's sprinting. And yes, there's going to be a level of that athlete getting faster if they weren't sprinting prior to that. But if we're talking about a little bit more of evolved athlete who's already performing these things, like how do we really maximize and get their ability to essentially sprint? So I'm going to break this down in the most simplistic way. Again, depending on how many days you're training, we can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 7 days a week. There could be recovery. There could be all these different things, but I'm going to break this down from a programming and modality perspective into a simplistic 4-day split. Okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to focus on 2 days sprinting and 2 days plyometrics. Okay. And they'll probably oscillate. So you'll probably go 1 day, start off on a Monday, plyometrics. Let's say Tuesday, you do some sprinting, take off Wednesday, Thursday, we go plyos, and then finish off Friday with some more sprinting. So how are we going to break this down? First plyometric day, or how you're going to oscillate the two, is first you want to on one of the days focus on horizontal force. Now these are going to be things such as your broad jump, your single leg broad jumps, your single leg double broad, single leg triples, all these different variations, any kind of resisted jumps, all your pogos, everything's associated with that to develop horizontal force. And the reason being is because horizontal force is directly going to translate over to your acceleration during your first 10 yards of sprinting, should I say. Next day of plyometrics is going to focus purely on vertical force. Now, vertical force is going to be all your box jumps, your seated box jumps. There's progressions to all these things of how to develop vertical force, but making sure that you're performing, obviously, where you're just fighting gravity, going up and down in the vertical plane, okay? So however that looks like, that's what you're going to focus on. Now, when it comes to vertical force, that directly translates over to top speed sprinting. And we know this because when athletes are put on force plates, during acceleration, athletes display more horizontal force. And during top speed, or anything after, let's say 15, 20 yards, when the athlete's torso is upright and they're cycling in that motion, they're actually displaying more vertical force. So we want to make sure that we balance out and address both of those. Now, when it comes to the actual sprinting other 2 days, 1 day, we're going to focus on acceleration. And these are going to be drilling those specific drills for the first 10 yards. So my approach to acceleration is usually, because I'm working with athletes, it starts with your stance, your start, which is your first initial movements, and then your steps. Now, stance, when I say that, is usually because when you're teaching acceleration, it depends on the athlete. We could teach the principles of trajectory and all those different things and lining them up in the right torso and shin angles. But the other thing that we're trying to do is, it again depends on the sport. If I have a baseball athlete, they're going to stand in a more lateral stance when they're going to steal a base. So I have to teach them acceleration out of that stance. The next is their start. So those initial movements and that initial jump is key for them to be, and how they're loading and what legs and what lever points, I guess you could say, that they're initiating or loading is key to them getting a clean and efficient jump. And then finally is their steps. And usually during that acceleration, we're going to drill particular movements to essentially place them in a low hill recovery and a positive trajectory. So what does that mean? What's up, coaches? Real quickly, let me go ahead and introduce you to Performance Coach U certification. Now, this is the certification / course that I put together for coaches who want to train athletes and not only get results, but also maximize profits in the private sector. The problem that I saw with a lot of these courses and certifications out there for coaches was that they provided a lot of information and not a lot of application. So I wanted to pull back the covers over 10 plus years of experience and show you the ins and outs of actually being in the trenches so that you get maximum results while also scaling your business. So if you're interested in this, go ahead and check out the link down below and you can get more information. So low heel recovery essentially means that they're not performing this long swooping motion after takeoff of the foot contact, right? So after they're pushing off, right, are we performing more of a piston action and attacking back down to the ground and actually pushing away from the ground, pushing ourselves in that positive horizontal trajectory? Or are we performing a long pulling motion that actually inhibits our stride length and also doesn't allow us to maximize those acceleration benefits of pushing away from the ground? So that's really what we're focused on with low heel recovery. And there's some drills that we could perform. There's some kinesthetic cues like putting a dowel rod behind the athlete's back ankles so that they don't hit the stick, some ground starts, some half kneeling starts. Either these things are either working the trajectory again, or we can do some drills that they're going to focus on that low heel recovery. The biggest thing, again, that I try to focus on during that phase is putting them in a position where they're most efficient and attacking back down the ground and really focus on that pushing motion. And that's really when we address the steps. So again, sometimes you can cue it and you can really work with the athlete at a high level if they're very moldable and coachable to be able to get them to perform, meaning a cue can stick and they can have that aha moment where essentially they can correct themselves because you're not as a high velocity as top speed. And usually that can get them to stick, and you just have to integrate and drill and drill and drill and make sure that that cue sticks. And sometimes you just have to drill over time. And what happens is through drilling that motor pattern, you can see through repetitions and positive reinforcement of that pattern that you can eventually start to get that will transfer over to sport. The other side of that is going to be top speed. Now, top speed is also referenced to maximum velocity. That's the other day we're going to focus on. And this is going to be where the athlete is a little bit more upright. These are our longer sprints, right? The torso is more upright and the athlete is performing that cyclical like motion. Now, depending on the level of athlete, if it's more of a youth athlete, just by simply getting that stimulus of higher velocities for longer distance and accumulating volume is going to be with the other 3 days is going to be sufficient enough, right? Most of these athletes just don't sprint enough, really, in all reality, especially team sport athletes. That's why you see guys who enter track at a youth level and they just absolutely shoot up with their speed because they're actually sprinting at a high level for volume. With your more advanced athletes, if you can identify some kind of inefficiency in that cyclical pattern, then there's certain things you can address, from going from front side to back side, or just how they're applying force. If they're creating a brake-like mechanism where they strike the foot, things of that nature. So you can get more on a mechanical standpoint. From a mechanical standpoint, really start to positively reinforce the movements and the motor patterns that you want to see. And what you have to realize from a mechanical standpoint is maximum velocity. To be able to alter a movement at such a high velocity, you can't just really cue and hope it to stick and actually transfer to sport. You actually have to drill, think 10,000 repetitions for us to actually start to get that positive adaptation. In fact, some of my higher level athletes who are still pretty fast, for us to make one adjustment from a long pulling motion in the backside to go more front side, right, and increase stride length, what we can actually see is that it could take up to 2 off seasons for us to really see that positive adaptation in mechanics. So again, it's just being able to identify the most simplest, the inefficiencies that you could touch, and then just making sure you're getting the volume in. So tying it back into it, I know I'm kind of going on a rant there as far as how developing acceleration and top speed, but the biggest thing to understand is if I just had to develop linear speed in an athlete and I didn't have to focus on other modalities like agility, like rotational force, like all these other things that they may face, really the biggest focus is make sure you're checking the box. Make sure you're focusing on starts one day, your 10-yard sprints. Make sure you're focused on longer sprints, your buildups, right? And all those different drills that are associated with the torso upright and that cyclical motion to be able to enhance maximum velocity or top speed. Then make sure that you're supporting that and supplementing that by performing horizontal focus plyometrics, whether that be bilateral, right, off 2 feet or 1 foot. And then make sure you're doing that same thing for vertical force, right, off of 1 foot and 2 feet. And make sure that there's a progression of complexity between all four of those modalities. And if you're doing that over an off season, you're going to see an athlete continue to progress, and their speed overall is going to progress in that off season pretty rapidly. I hope that helps. Just wanted to kind of touch on the 4 boxes that you need to check if you need to maximize the linear speed capacity in an athlete. So hope you could take those away and keep it a little bit more simplistic when it comes to linear speed development. I'll holler at you guys next time.